Hello and welcome to Tuesday Talks at Mary Spring Nature Center for 2026. My name is John Fromer, the Program Director and your host. Today's Tuesday Talk is generously sponsored by Camden River House. Recordings are made possible by the Cascade Foundation. You can find today's talk and previous talks on our YouTube channel. Mary Spring is open every day of the year from dawn to dusk free of charge. Find out more at maryspring.org. Today's talk is by Ed Geis of Bald Mountain Botanicals on growing hemp for CBD.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ed Geis. I live in Camden, and I wanted to talk a little bit about growing hemp and tell you a little bit about the plant, both the history of the plant and its role in human society, and also a little bit about the natural characters of the plant. I want to talk a little bit about the uses and specifically about medicine, because hemp is the source of CBD, or cannabidiol, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail. But that's a very valuable medicinal compound that's used to treat many different medical conditions. So I got interested in hemp basically during the pandemic. It was kind of a lockdown sanity check. I really needed to do something outdoors to sort of keep myself centered during that difficult time. And I had heard about growing hemp, and I'd heard about the power of CBD and the fact that CBD came from hemp. This, by the way, is a hemp flower that I'm showing you here. This is a almost completely ripe hemp flower, and it's where the medicine comes from. And anyway, so I had heard about the hemp plant and the CBD medicine from, of all people, Ron Gronkowski, who, if any of you are sports fans, will recognize that name. He was a star tight end for the New England Patriots, and he I'm actually getting ahead of myself here on my talk, so I'm going to actually go back to my notes and circle back to where I was, and we'll talk about Ron Gronkowski and CBD in a moment. But I just wanted to give you a couple quick views of the plant. This is the plant in the flowering stage. This is the plant in what's called the vegetative stage before it flowers. As you can see, it can get quite big. This one actually has a trellis on it, which can be helpful to keep the plant intact during windstorms and heavy rains. Here's another picture of the flower. And this is a picture of pollen sacs on hemp. And one of the interesting things about hemp is that it's a plant that is both male and female. So this is actually a male plant that has pollen, and then these are female plants that grow the flowers, and the flowers are where the medicine comes from. So we're primarily interested in growing the female plants. I ended up creating a small business crafting CBD topical balm and CBD oil, which we'll talk about more in a minute. But these are products that are made from the hemp flower, and they work as medicine to treat a whole variety of conditions. Let's talk a little bit, though, about the history of hemp and the hemp plant. So the official Latin name for hemp is Cannabis sativa, and it's actually very close to what we know as marijuana. But what the difference between hemp and marijuana is primarily in chemistry. So the hemp plant contains a very small amount of what's called the psychoactive compound in marijuana. And that means that hemp is not intoxicating. So whereas people use marijuana sometimes to achieve an altered state of mind, it does have medicinal uses as well, but it also has mental effects. Hemp doesn't really have that so much. It's really more of a medicine. So you can see how the plant began or it's thought to have originated almost 12,000 years ago in Asia, and then sort of migrated around the world, partly through natural means, and also at some point human beings domesticated hemp and started using it and taking the seeds with them. And you may not recognize this fellow, but that's George Washington at Mount Vernon. He was a big hemp grower, as were many of the colonists in the early days of America. They grew hemp for making rope, for making clothing, a whole host of other things. Here's a picture of a harvest. This is the field workers after the hemp has been cut, and they are gathering up the dried stalks to be processed into, probably in this case, it looks like they were going to be using it for fiber. So they're either making rope or they're making clothing out of it. So hemp was, again, very common in America during the early part of our country's founding, and even actually up until the 1930s and 40s when it became illegal. This is I think it's Eli Lilly. Yes, Eli Lilly Pharmacy actually marketed a cannabis-based medicine here, which was used for treating a number of different things. But it was actually quite common in American pharmacies back in the 19th century and even up into the early 20th century to see cannabis medicines just sold in regular drugstores and pharmacies. So let me circle back around now to Rob Gronkowski, who I mentioned earlier, the athlete who had to quit football at the age of 28 because he had such terrible chronic pain that he just couldn't take it anymore. And he was at the pinnacle of his career, and it was quite an emotional thing for him to have to leave. But he was introduced to CBD by, he says, his father, and it was so successful in treating his chronic pain that he actually returned to the National Football League, and I think he had several more years of high performance seasons in the National Football League after using CBD to manage his pain. So I was really kind of struck by that. I don't know Rob Gronkowski at all, but he seems like a very decent guy, and the fact that an elite American athlete was using CBD successfully at the highest levels of competition made me think that, okay, there must be really something to this. It's not just a fad. So that was during the pandemic that I discovered this. And the active ingredient that helped Rob Gronkowski, and that's the medicine in hemp, is called CBD or cannabidiol. And this is a depiction of the chemical structure of CBD. And it's really just something that the plant naturally produces on its own. Cannabis plants produce a number of different what's called cannabinoids, and CBD is one. THC, which is more commonly associated with marijuana, is another one. And hemp is very high in CBD, but low in THC. So again, it's not a psychoactive or intoxicating compound. It's really more of a medicinal compound. Hemp also has compounds called terpenes, which are what give plants the smell that they have. So, for example, if you walk into a pine forest and you smell that piney odor, that's pinene, which is a terpene. And this is a terpene called limonene, which is something that you will find in citrus fruit. It's that distinctive odor that you get from orange rinds and lemons and that kind of thing. And this is happens to be one of the terpenes that's very common in the variety of hemp that I grow called cannabidiol. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into the sort of biology of how CBD works, but essentially the nervous system, or the physiology of all vertebrates, not just humans, but a huge array of organisms in the natural world, have what's called an endocannabinoid system. And there's a lot of fascinating research that talks about this in detail, but it's basically a regulatory system that exists throughout the human body. And its function is to maintain homeostasis. So if something gets out of whack, like you're having terrible inflammation or something isn't quite right in one of your physical processes, the endocannabinoid system is kind of the regulatory apparatus that will try to correct what's going wrong and bring things back into harmony and balance. Again, there's a lot of fascinating research about this, but what CBD and other cannabinoids do is they bind with receptors that are part of this endocannabinoid system, and they interact with those receptors and produce certain phenomena that will either reduce inflammation or alleviate pain or give people a sense of calmness. One very famous story that actually made CBD famous is a young girl named Charlotte Figge out in Colorado suffered from a terrible, cruel form of epilepsy called Dravet syndrome. And growing up as a little girl, she had seizures throughout the day. They were quite painful, and it was really a miserable experience for a child. And her parents were beside themselves. They tried all kinds of pharmaceutical solutions, and they'd seen specialists and doctors, and nothing was really working to help relieve poor Charlotte's seizures. So out of desperation, after doing some research, Charlotte's mother decided that they would try CBD. And there was a grower in Colorado. This was back in, I think, 2013. There was a grower in Colorado who was just kind of experimenting with it, and they managed to get some, and they gave some to Charlotte. And they said that within a couple days, her seizures started to become much less frequent. And to make a long story short, she made a pretty much full recovery. She had daily regimen of CBD, and it actually would say it cured the epilepsy, but it made it much more manageable and allowed her to be able to play with other children and go to school and have a more normal life. So that was really one of the more famous stories that put CBD on the map. And in fact, the FDA has actually approved a CBD-based drug for children's epilepsy called Epidiolex. That's the first FDA-approved CBD drug. The FDA has still been very reluctant to approve widespread use of CBD. Basically, I think because of its approximation to marijuana and the federal sort of stigma around marijuana, it seems to be very slow for the FDA to fully embrace CBD. But they have approved Epidiolex, and they are in the process of approving some other drugs. So again, it all comes from the hemp flower and the cannabinoids and terpenes that are produced by the flower. So during the pandemic, as I said, I grew a single plant, and the experience of growing the hemp plant was really helpful to me in that time, just psychologically spending the time outdoors. I'm sure some of you have spent time in your garden during that time and probably other times, and it can be very therapeutic. So I grew this single hemp plant. I harvested the flowers. I processed them into a CBD oil, and I tried it. The first experiment I did was when I had a pretty severe migraine, and I took several milligrams of CBD, and I'd say within about 20 minutes of that, my migraine pretty much disappeared. I was quite amazed by that. So that was a sort of successful foray into CBD, and I decided that this was something that I wanted to know more about and learn more about, and eventually started this business of growing organic hemp and creating organic CBD products. So let me tell you a little bit about the process of growing it here in Maine. I don't know if any of you have ever tried to grow hemp or have had any interest in growing hemp. You don't see it around a lot, but there are hemp farms in Maine, and it's not, I wouldn't say it's hard to grow in Maine, but it could be tricky if you don't know some certain things. So I'll try to kind of quickly go over some of that. Because of our climate in Maine, needing to plant so late, because of the cold springs potentially and the frost even up to Memorial Day, I always start the hemp indoors. And so I plant my hemp from seed. You can get cuttings and so forth, but I prefer to grow from seed because you get a deeper taproot that way. So I start by soaking the seeds, and then that happens usually around the first week of April. I like to do it on a new moon, but that's not essential. That just happens to be my belief, and then you get a better germination rate that way. So they start off in little planting trays, and they get kept inside under lights. They come up fairly quickly within a few days, and then you have your little hemp seedlings. This is actually, believe it or not, one of the more precarious stages of growing hemp, because it's very easy, if any of you work with seedlings, to overwater or have other problems, and they're very delicate. So I grow in an organic potting mix made by Stonington, which I highly recommend. They seem to do very well in that, and then eventually they get transplanted as the weather warms up in May to these 1-gallon nursery pots. And here's a bunch of hemp seedlings that are about these are maybe 5 or 6 weeks old. We're looking at maybe the early mid-May here. So they're definitely coming along. Hemp grows quickly. Let's see. I put them in cold frames, and so here's a shot of them in some of the cold frames. So I like to get them outdoors as quickly as possible, but because in May we still have potential frost, they stay in a cold frame where I can keep the lid protecting the plants. I use organic and no-till agriculture methods. So everything is certified organic by MAFCA. And I'm really interested in building soil health. And I've come to believe that the key to success in growing anything is having healthy soil, and that's where your focus should be. So I use a living soil, and I try to do as much as I can to foster a rich population of microorganisms in the soil, which helps to feed the plant and give the plant the nutrients that it needs. Here's a older seedling, again in the nursery pot. They're going to be transplanted at the usually the first week of June into these holes that I've prepared and mulched with hay. And this is sort of a big moment for the growing season when you go out of the nursery pots and into the ground. They usually do very well. They sort of stop growing for about a week while they get their roots settled into the soil. But then once that happens, they'll start to really shoot up. So here they are again in the field. And this is an example of one of the pruning things that I like to do with hemp, which is to top it. In other words, I take the leader and I cut it just at below the last node, and then you end up with 2 branches of 2 leaders instead of 1, and that produces more branches, a bushier plant with more flowers, so you get to harvest more flowers. And here you can see a little example of what's a early young hemp plant with the flower just beginning to appear at one of the nodes. This is a hemp plant that I just topped. I like to use companion plants with my hemp. So these are marigolds, which are supposed to help sort of distract pests from attacking your plants. In terms of pests, I've found that the most successful strategy for protecting your plants from disease and pests is to have a healthy and resilient plant. I don't spray anything. I don't really even do direct battle with pests usually. I just focus on making the plant as healthy as possible. And I found that the plant's natural resistance seems to do the best job in terms of repelling repelling pests. The other piece of advice I would give you is it's important to rotate your hemp so that you're not growing it in the same spot year after year after year. Because after about 2 years of growing in the same spot, your hemp will tend to get more disease and more pests. That's just a sort of truism of agriculture. So rotation is key. We also have ducks on our farm, and they're fun to watch, but they also play an important role with the hemp in terms of, for example, eating slugs and other pests and aerating the soil as they sort of poke their beaks into the root zone. And then, of course, their droppings help enrich the soil with nitrogen. Hemp is a fairly heavy feeder, so it requires a fair bit of nitrogen during the vegetative stage, and then in the flowering stage, which happens usually in the latter part of August and into September and October, hemp requires fairly high amounts of phosphorus. Mulch is also a really important part of my methods. I think that it's very important to maintain the moisture in the soil, which the mulch does better than anything. By the way, I don't use plastic mulch. I have a lot of concerns about plastic and plastic mulch, and I try to keep everything as natural and sustainable as possible, which plastic certainly is not. So I recommend some sort of straw mulch. This is actually just clippings from mown meadow on our property that I've used. One of the pleasures of organic agriculture, of course, is that you have lots of great organisms that live on the plants and use them as habitat. So here's just an example of a spider that lives on the plant. And actually, many of these organisms, including ladybugs, dragonflies also, can be very helpful in terms of removing pests and keeping your plants healthy. Here's the ducks again. It's just a shot that I took of some raindrops after a rain. We've had some drought challenges in Maine lately, especially this year, so I have had to do some irrigation. But hemp is really pretty forgiving. It doesn't like to have wet feet. It likes a well-drained soil. But it's as long as it gets water, every week or so, it does just fine. You can see the dog is guarding the hemp plant here from any possible threatening invaders. Here's the dragonfly. Ladybugs, again, these are great to see on your plants. Very helpful in terms of handling pests. This is just a picture I took to show what a living soil has. So there's a lot of life, including earthworms and other organisms in there that take the things in the soil that you may add, for example, like compost or compost manure, and breaks it down into a form that the plant can take up into its roots. I do a lot of cover cropping. So this is just an example of alfalfa that I've used as a cover crop. As the hemp proceeds through the vegetative stage through the summer, it eventually enters into a kind of final dramatic stage, which is called the stretch. This is like the last part of the vegetative stage in late July, early August, when the hemp will suddenly grow at a phenomenal rate. Really, you can almost see it day to day. It'll put on a lot of extra height, and it's making room for the flowers that it's just about to start producing in August. What triggers the switch in a hemp plant from the vegetative stage to flowering stage is the length of the night. So as our nights begin to get longer after the summer solstice on June 21st, the plants sense that winter is coming and that they need to start preparing seeds, because these are annual plants and they're going to die at the end of the season, and their whole existence is really kind of focused on producing seeds so that they can leave progeny for the next generation. So as the days get shorter and the nights get longer, the plants initially do the stretch, and then they proceed to flower. And this is an example of the very early stages of a hemp flower beginning to grow. And as we get into September, they grow a little bit bigger and fatter, and they put on quite a bit more bulk. Here's another shot of the hemp crop heading into, this must be into September here. We're getting some color and the leaves start to fade. The hemp gets very fragrant at this stage. I find it a enjoyable fragrance. Some people find it a little bit pungent sometimes, but it's really kind of a woodsy, spicy, exotic kind of odor that sort of can, toward the end of the as you approach the harvest date, can really get quite strong. So as you can see, the flowers get quite big at the very end, and as we get into the very end and the weather starts to turn cold, you even start to see some interesting colors. And this is actually a particular cultivar of hemp that has a lot of purples that come out. Just seems to be a genetic variation. So the plant is harvested and hung. I harvest just before dawn when the terpenes are at their strongest. And then the plant is hung, and then the branches are separated and the leaves are removed for the most part. And you end up with a dried plant that needs to hang up and dry for a period of usually 2 weeks or so. And then it gets cured in larger containers. And the curing process helps to sort of stabilize the plant's medicinal compounds and keep it in a state where it can remain fresh. Now, some people will actually use the raw hemp flower itself for either cooking, or some people will vaporize it. Some people will even smoke it. Some people just eat it raw. But most people will prefer the CBD when it's in a processed form. So what I do is I take the hemp flower after it's been dried and cured, stored, and then I make CBD oil by infusing the flower material into a MCT oil, which is a medium chain triglyceride oil made from coconut. And you infuse the flower in the warm oil, and you end up with a infused oil that has a high amount of CBD in it. And then that is the medicine that you can take. And the other product that I make is a topical CBD product. So with the oil, you ingest it, you take it with food, or you put it under your tongue sublingually. But it's something that your body processes through the digestive system. Whereas a topical CBD product is something that you spread on your skin, and it's really more for localized issues, like, for example, a sore joint, or maybe you have a rash somewhere. It's especially good at arthritis. People that have arthritis in their hands, for example, will often use the CBD balm for that purpose. So what I do with the CBD flowers is create these different products, oil and balm, and I also sell the hemp flower for people that like to use that separately. And what these medicines really do better than anything is they fight inflammation, and that is maybe the most important characteristic of CBD's medicinal value. Is it's a very potent anti-inflammatory. So people use it to treat all kinds of conditions that will involve inflammation. For example, some people suffer from a digestive issue called Crohn's disease, which is essentially an inflammation of the gut. And CBD has been shown in research and clinical practice to be successful for many people in treating the symptoms of Crohn's disease and making it more manageable. It doesn't necessarily cure it, but it helps to alleviate the pain. Another common use people have is for treating insomnia. CBD for many people helps them get to sleep at night, or sometimes stay asleep if they tend to wake up in the middle of the night. Let's see, here's the hemp field after the harvest, and that kind of lonely October chill. But I'll show you one more thing. If you want to learn more about the products and CBD in general, I have a website at baldmountainbotanicals.com, and there is a blog there if you want to poke around and see more about the harvest, or about some of the things that we do in terms of testing our products. All of the products that we make are tested because one of the issues with CBD is that because the FDA has not really regulated it in the way that they do most other drugs, there's a lot of CBD on the market that maybe hasn't been tested, and could be contaminated with things like heavy metals, pesticides, sometimes mold. It's really important if you do shop for CBD that you only buy CBD that has been tested and that the manufacturer or the vendor makes the test results available. So, for example, on my products, all the lab test results for each batch are posted on the website. People can go check to verify that it's potent, it has the amount of CBD that the label says it has, and also that it's free from contaminants like heavy metals or pesticides. So, I sort of went a little bit quickly there, but I think I gave you the basic overview of what hemp is and um, sort of how it's evolved in our society from a plant that was ubiquitous in American farms in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, and then became outlawed in the early 20th century, along with cannabis. Along with marijuana. And now, with the passage of the Farm Bill in 2018, hemp became federally legal to grow. And that's why we've seen this resurgence in hemp and CBD. Now, I grow hemp for the flowers and for the medicine, but as I mentioned earlier, some people grow hemp for the fiber, which can be used to make clothing, can also used to make rope. Now, the clothing, I just want to mention that there's a big challenge there in that there are currently no American manufacturing facilities for hemp clothing, which is a big burden for hemp farmers in finding a reliable market for hemp fiber. It gets tricky when it has to be shipped overseas to where they do make hemp clothing. And what we really need in the United States is to have a viable hemp clothing industry with onshore production, processing of hemp fiber into clothing. So, I think that pretty much covers the salient points. It leaves us some time for discussion and questions, which I'd love to entertain. So, if it's okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and I'd love to hear what your questions and thoughts are about hemp and CBD.
Ed, thank you very much. Fascinating. And I'm going to share my screen again. Now, we have a very limited audience, unfortunately, and that is due to perhaps a limitation on Apple's end within the last week. If you have questions, could you put them in the chat, and then Ed would have access to that, and we can have Ed answer your questions going forward.
And where can someone buy your product?
Good question. So I currently sell primarily from my website, and that is baldmountainbotanicals.com.
Thank you for joining this Tuesday talk. For more information, please visit Mary Spring at www.maryspring.org and also on our YouTube channel.